From humble beginnings as a playing card company to making 1.02 trillion yen or 9.26 billion US dollars at the end of the 2019 fiscal year, This Is It on Nintendo. This Is It is a series I kind of came up with to talk about just companies that I think have done well or doing good or better or just generally are still around today, or companies that are not around today but did awesome when they were in their prime. This one is on Nintendo because I know a good enough bit about them, but I would really like to do other companies, branch out from video game stuff, and even just get into other things. Real quick, there's a bunch of names in here that I have no idea how to pronounce. I'm really sorry. Nintendo was founded in 1889 by Fusajiro Yamauchi as a company, I said it so wrong, as a company that sold playing cards for the card game Hanafuda. Now, Hanafuda is kind of a card game that is centered around getting more points than your opponent. Originally, Nintendo was known as Nintendo Koppai, and we'll get into more of their name changes later, but Yamauchi also hired a bunch of assistants to help him with all this stuff, and because they were growing kind of rapidly, they needed assistants. But people can't live forever, so Yamauchi needed a successor, but he had no sons. So Yamauchi followed a Japanese tradition where he adopted his son-in-law, who was named Sekiryo Yamauchi. I don't remember his actual last name. Who took over for the company in 1929. In 1933, Sekiryo established a joint venture, which is basically two companies working together, but they still keep their same company identities. And he renamed the company Yamauchi Nintendo and Company. Then in 1947, Sekiryo established a manufacturing company under the name Marufuku Company Limited. He formed this company who produced the Hanafuda cards that Nintendo was making, but also other playing cards that were coming out around that time. Sekiryo also only had daughters, so when he was looking for a successor, he also adopted his son-in-law, whose name was Shikanojo Inaba, who was renamed Shikanojo Yamauchi, but he would never actually become president because he abandoned his family and his son, Hiroshi Inaba. And Hiroshi Inaba was raised by his grandparents, Sekiryo and whatever Sekiryo's wife's name was. And thus, Hiroshi would be the next successor after his grandfather unfortunately passed away. Now, Hiroshi isn't here yet, but enter, this is the greatest mind to ever run Nintendo. Hands down. In 1949, Hiroshi Yamauchi was attending Waseda University, but his grandfather passed away, and so he left school to go take the company in his stead. This man's track record is fucking amazing. This guy did awesome shit in like 10 years. In 1951, he renamed Marufuku Company Limited to Nintendo Playing Card Company Limited. Then in 1953, Nintendo became the first company to make playing cards out of plastic, at least in Japan. Then in 1956, Hiroshi traveled to the United States to see the United States Playing Card Company. But he noticed that even for how big they were at the time, the office was really small because playing cards were seen more as a gambling thing than anything else. And they were not seen as a way to have any sort of business. They were for gambling, and that was it. And so what did he do, as you know, a normal business owner does when they're kind of seeing that their business might go under? He decides to change his demographic to children. So he goes to a company called Disney. You ever fucking heard of Disney? Hiroshi got the rights to use Disney characters on playing cards. And then he also created books showing the non-gambling ways to use these Hanafuda and other playing cards to play different games, expanding his entire demographic hugely. The company hit a booming success, showing there were so many different things you could do with these cards and not just gamble. Nintendo sold a reported 600,000 card packs per year, and this was so successful that Hiroshi took Nintendo public to the Osaka Stock Exchange Second Division in 1962. Then in 1963, following a bunch of success from the playing cards and everything else, he renamed the company from Nintendo Playing Card Company Limited to just Nintendo. Also in 1963, Hiroshi decided to go to other avenues to see what he could sell. They did a taxi service, a love hotel chain, and a food company selling instant rice instead of instant noodles. Hiroshi attempted a lot more things than this, but I won't go into them too deep because that would make this video way too long. But the one that really stuck, the one that stayed, was making toys. Due to all the success from the 50s all the way through the 60s, in 1964, everything was looking great for Hiroshi and the company, but then with the 1964 Tokyo Olympics going, there was an economic boom in Japan, and that would normally be good for a business, but locals were not seeing the need as much to buy these playing cards, and the stock dropped from a reported 900 yen to 600 yen in the stock exchange. Then in 1965, for my dad's birthday, Hiroshi hired Junpei Yokoi as a maintenance engineer on the assembly line, but Yokoi would go on to do much more than just some conveyor belt maintenance. Nowadays, we know Nintendo is a big dog in the gaming scene, but way back when, it wasn't exactly like that. When they were making toys, they were pretty much the lowest of the low because there were companies like Bandai and Tomy that were cornering the toy market in Japan. That, along with the very horrible shelf life of toys, caused a lot of Nintendo's products to not really be bought or sold or even seen. And they were kind of going downhill, a bit slow, but still going downhill in sales. Then in 1966, Hiroshi was observing a Hanafuda factory and he noticed a little robotic arm that was just kind of, roboting. And it was developed by Junpei Yokoi. And because of this, he was very impressed that Junpei did this in his free time. So he told him that he wanted him to Hiroshi ordered Junpei to create a toy for the Christmas rush. And so Junpei created the Ultra Hand. This Ultra Hand became one of Nintendo's first and earliest blockbuster toy sales, selling a reported over 1 million units. Hiroshi was a really good judge of character, and he saw a lot of potential in Yokoi, so he pulled him off of assembly line maintenance and put him to product development. Just a big promotion almost immediately. The biggest thing about this was Yokoi had an electrical engineering background, and so he was able to be very adept with making electrical toys. Both kinds. There is absolutely no evidence to support this claim. These kind of devices had a higher novelty value, and therefore Hiroshi could have a wider price margin when he was selling them. Yokoi developed many other toys for Nintendo, like the 10 Million Barrel Puzzle, the Ultra Game, which was a baseball-style game, a Love Tester, and a game made, a toy made in part with Masayuki Uemura from Sharp called the Nintendo Beam Gun, which was the precursor to the NES Zapper, which was used in games like Duck Hunt. Nintendo released the first solar-powered beam gun, the Beam Gun, in 1970. And then in 1972, they made Ella Conga, the first programmable drum machine. In 1972, Nintendo worked with the first commercially available video game console, the Magnavox Odyssey, and they had a beam gun style port thing for a game they had on there called the Shooting Gallery. Martin Picard in the International Journal of Computer Game Research said it best when he said, I'm going to read it off here because I don't want to get it wrong. In 1971, Nintendo had, even before marketing the first home console in the United States, an alliance with the American pioneer Magnavox to develop and produce optoelectronic guns for the Odyssey, which was released in 1972, since it was similar to what Nintendo was able to offer in the Japanese toy market in the 1970s. In 1973, Nintendo went to more family-oriented venues, and they made the Laser Clay shooting system, which you can learn more about in the link down below. It's a lot going into it, and I'm not going to be able to cover the whole thing in this video, and I'm just not going to cover it at all. It just doesn't work in this space. Then in 1974 or 1975, it's kind of unclear, Nintendo secured the rights to market and distribute the Magnavox Odyssey. Oh my fucking god. Finally, in 1974 or 1975, it's unclear, Nintendo secured the rights to market and distribute the Magnavox Odyssey in Japan. This was Nintendo's first really big step into getting into the video gaming market, but they did not know how good or how much of a big first step this actually was. This just made sense getting the Magnavox Odyssey rights as well, because Nintendo had already made the beam gun, which was working with the Magnavox Odyssey already, so they just would continually just distribute the Magnavox Odyssey in Japan, make money off of it, and have a good partnership with a company that had a system that seemed like it would go far into the future. So, big, round of applause all around. Then, I know what you're thinking, there's kind of this weird gap between when the NES was made and released, Famicom and NES was made in 85, 86, and this is in 74, 75. There's a big 10, 11 year gap right there. So what's going on? Well, I'll tell you, buddy. Thanks for asking. Now, the start of the consoles in Nintendo was actually not the NES/Famicom. It was actually with the color TV game that was made in collaboration with Mitsubishi Electric in 1977. But just 2 years prior, Mitsubishi released the hatchback Lancer Celeste in 1975. Good on you, Mitsubishi. Getting every market. Now, the early Nintendo consoles are a lot to talk about, so I'm not going to go over them in too much detail because it's just a lot to talk about. So I'm going to go over kind of the bigger ones that were, more bigger, if that makes sense. So it was the Color, in 1977, it was the Color TV Game 6 and the Color TV Game 15. The numbers represented how many games were on the system, 6 and 15 respectively. Then in the early 1980s, Nintendo had finally started making some arcade games, and they had an actual game development center that was run and headed by Junpei Yokoi. And the first game they created was Donkey Kong, made by Shigeru Miyamoto. Donkey Kong was also released on the Atari 2600, the Intellivision, and the ColecoVision, also in various things, but Nintendo didn't really have too much involvement in these ports. And then in 1985, the Nintendo Entertainment System was released. Wait. I feel like I'm forgetting something. That's because I am. From 1980 to 1981, they released little things called Game & Watch. Game & Watch were the first real big steps that Nintendo took to creating a console all by themselves. Beforehand, they had help with other people, like I said, with Mitsubishi Electric, and then going just with the Magnavox Odyssey. But Game & Watch were the first ones they could actually kind of do on their own. They wanted to test the waters, so to speak. And just so you know, the Game & Watch sold a reported 43.4 million units worldwide. It's a lot of units. So after Game & Watch, I know we're getting to the NES, but there's just a couple quick little things we have to talk about. The big one is the AVS, Advanced Video System, that was released in 1982. Then in 1983, Nintendo released the Famicom in Japan. They released it for $100 USD, which in today's money, because that's 1980s money, in today's money, it's $257. Nintendo wanted to release the Famicom in America, which was the biggest video gaming market at the time, but unfortunately, as they were getting ready to head the release, the infamous video game crash of 1983 happened. I'll go over that in a separate video because it's too much to talk about right now. Nintendo wanted to release in there, but because of the crash, obviously it would be a little bit harder. So what did Nintendo do, being a rational company that's trying to sell in a new market? They took a huge risk with huge reward, but also a big load of backlash. And enter, they released the Nintendo Entertainment System in 1985 in New York as a test market, and then they released it nationwide in 1986. This starts the biggest boom of anything Nintendo did for a little while. The Nintendo Entertainment System started out coming out in 86, came out with 15 games, and then in the same year, Metroid and Super Mario Bros. 2 came out. So you know, Super Mario Bros. 1 came out on the Famicom in 85, and it was released with the Nintendo Entertainment System. Then, 1 year later, in 1987, The Legend of Zelda was released. Then, in 1988, Nintendo of America, an American subsidiary of Nintendo Company Maine in Japan, released Nintendo Power, which was a weekly or monthly, I think it was a monthly, in a monthly publication, Nintendo Power, which that magazine then ceased publication in December of 2012. Big sad. In 1989, Nintendo released the Game Boy with Tetris. And this handheld console sold 118 million units, reportedly. Then Super Mario Man was released for the Game Boy, and that sold 18 million units, reportedly. 14 million units, reportedly. Also in 1989, Nintendo said that, oh my fucking god. Also in 1980, fucking Christ, man. Also in 1989, Nintendo announced that they were going to have a successor to the NES, or the Famicom, known as the Super Famicom, or the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, or the SNES. Super Mario Bros. 3 was the last first-party Nintendo game to be released on the Famicom and NES in 1990. Then later in 1990, they released the Super Famicom in Japan, and it sold out in 3 days. Not 3 weeks, not 3 months, 3 days. 3. Now, give you a point, this is not when video games are the big thing yet. People are going to arcades more than they're going to home consoles. It sold out in 3 days. Then in 1991, the Super Famicom under the name Super Nintendo Entertainment System was released in America and then in Europe in 1992. Also, fun fact, the SNES was actually supposed to have a CD-ROM they were making in partnership with Sony, but for some reason Nintendo backed out from this product they were calling the Nintendo PlayStation, which is weird to say. So Sony just continued development and called it just the PlayStation. From here we're speeding up, and I'm going to actually have to go off of the card because we're going to be going a little quick. Ready? So from here then in 1992 the Virtual Boy was made and released. The Nintendo 64 was released in 1996, and Nintendo felt the heat from the consoles like the PlayStation since it was easier for third-party developers to make games on a disc-based format rather than a cartridge. 1998 saw the release of the Game Boy Color, 2001 saw the release of the GameCube and the Game Boy Advance, then the Game Boy Advance SP in 2003, and the Game Boy Micro in 2005. In 2004, the Nintendo DS was released, and I'd say until like 2012, we saw the Nintendo DS really holding its own. In 2006, they released the Nintendo Wii, and just to clarify, I'm not going to go on the Anescape Limited lawsuit that was against Nintendo and Microsoft when the Wii came out and the Kinect came out and stuff like that. I'm not going to go over that at all. Just doesn't make any sense. If you want to read about it, look it up. Anescape is spelled ANASCAPE, Limited Ltd. There's a big lawsuit with them. Don't worry about it. Then in 2011, the 3DS was released, and in 2012, the Wii U was released. Then finally, in 2017, we saw the release of the Nintendo Switch. Now, that's one hell of a history. And no matter how young or old you are, you have some sort of Nintendo experience, whether going to a friend's house, having or owning a console of your own. And I also want to say that to Hiroshi Yamauchi, Junpei Yokoi, and Satoru Iwata, I hope they rest in peace because they made Nintendo what it is now. I hope they're happy with what they've made. I tip my hat to you, Nintendo. Anyways, this was it on Nintendo. We've got work to do.